I knew something was off the moment I heard the gate latch click. See, I live in a quiet cul-de-sac where people usually mind their business except for Beverly. Beverly Kingsley is the HOA vice president, self-appointed watchdog, and full-time pain in the neck. She's in her mid-50s, bleach blonde bob, oversized sunglasses, and a voice that sounds like a blender chewing gravel. She lives 5 houses down but acts like she owns the whole street. I'm Tobias Zeller. I train police K-9s for a living, been doing it for over 15 years. My property backs up to a wooded area, and I've got a secure 8-foot fence around the training yard. That morning, I had 2 dogs cooling down after a session, Thor and Echo, German shepherds. Well-trained but still police dogs, not pets. So I'm in the kitchen making coffee when I hear it, metal on metal, then a thud. I look out the back window and there she is, Beverly, in a pantsuit. Inside my fenced yard, I dropped the mug in the sink and rushed outside. "What the hell are you doing, Beverly?" She turned around, holding a clipboard like it was a holy relic. "You've got unauthorized modifications on the exterior of your home, Tobias. I've documented it. And this fence. It's 2 inches over regulation height. You jumped my fence," I shouted, walking toward her. "That's trespassing." I knocked. "You didn't answer. I have a responsibility to enforce the HOA's standards." "And your dogs," that's when she noticed Thor standing perfectly still 10 feet from her, ears up, tail stiff. Then Echo stepped in behind him. "Dogs, dogs," Beverly screamed, backing up toward the fence. I raised my hand. "Stop moving. I'm being attacked. They're not attacking you." "Yet," I said, "but you're in their territory and I trained them to respond to unauthorized entries." "I am the HOA," she shrieked. "Doesn't make you immune to the law," I said. "You're trespassing on private property, Beverly, and I've got cameras all over this yard." "You're on tape." She froze, clutching that stupid clipboard like it was going to save her. Echo took a step forward and gave a low, slow growl. Beverly jolted like she'd been hit by lightning. "Call them off." "I will. But you're going to climb right back over that fence the same way you came in. And then you're going to walk home and stay the hell off my property. I'll have you fined." I pointed at the security camera on the shed. "Go ahead, but first, let's send this footage to the police. I'm pretty sure they'll be interested in hearing why you thought it was okay to break and enter while 2 trained police dogs were off-leash." She didn't say another word, just backed up, grabbed the top of the fence, and tried to hoist herself over. It wasn't graceful. She got one leg over, lost her shoe, and tumbled into the neighbor's bushes. Thor just sat and watched like it was a show. I leaned on the fence and called out, "Next time you want to inspect something, try using the front door like a sane person." She limped off barefoot, clutching her clipboard like it was the only dignity she had left. I went to check my security feed, already thinking about how I'd forward the footage to Officer Ramirez at the precinct, because this wasn't over, not by a long shot. I wasn't expecting the knock the next morning. Sharp, rhythmic, way too early for a Saturday. I opened the front door to find Officer Ramirez leaning against the porch column, one hand resting casually on his belt. He raised an eyebrow. "Tobias." I stepped aside to let him in. "You saw the footage." "Watched it twice," he said, stepping into the foyer. "Beverly Kingsley is lucky Thor didn't take it personally. She's lucky Echo's the patient one." Ramirez gave a low chuckle and followed me into the living room. He dropped into the armchair and pulled a small notepad from his jacket. "Here's the thing. I spoke to Kingsley this morning. She tried to file a complaint, claimed your dogs attacked her while she was performing an HOA inspection. I looked at him flat. You serious?" She left out the part where she scaled an 8-foot fence. Of course she did. But she didn't know we already had the footage. Or that her own shoe was still sitting in your neighbor's hydrangeas. I dropped onto the couch across from him. "So what happens now?" She committed criminal trespass. That's not a slap on the wrist if we want to pursue it. But I figured I'd ask you first. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on my knees. Let's hold off on pressing charges for now, at least until I figure out what she's really after. Ramirez nodded slowly. Fair enough, but keep documenting everything. Something's off with her. After he left, I went out to the shed behind the training yard. I keep old case files in fireproof bins out there, stuff from clients, court-admissible footage, training logs. I pulled the most recent log for Thor and Echo and added a note detailing the incident. Date, time, behavioral response. Just in case, by late afternoon, the emails started arriving. The first one was from the HOA's Compliance and Standards Committee. Apparently, I was in violation of 3 separate ordinances, one for fence height exceeding community code, another for unauthorized animal activity, and a third for failure to cooperate with an HOA investigation. The last one made me laugh out loud. Then came the letter, certified mail, hand-delivered by some poor teenager who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. The envelope was too thick for just a warning. I opened it at the kitchen table with Echo lying at my feet. Inside was a formal notice of a disciplinary hearing. According to the letter, I was being summoned before the full HOA board in 3 days to explain my repeated violations and failure to comply with community standards. They'd even included glossy photos, close-ups of the fence, long shots of the dogs in the training yard, and one blurry image of Beverly's shoe in the neighbor's garden. That last one made me pause. They were using her own blunder as evidence against me. I folded everything neatly and placed it inside a manila file folder labeled HOA Escalation. Then I opened my laptop and pulled up the county zoning maps. Fence height regulations in our area are handled by the city, not the HOA. According to the online code, residential fences can be up to 8 feet tall in the rear of the property, exactly what mine was. I printed the relevant section and highlighted the clause in yellow. Next, I checked the animal ordinances. No restrictions on training police dogs on private property unless they're unlicensed or pose a public safety risk. Both my dogs are registered through the state's working canine unit. I called my neighbor, Marco. He's a paramedic and works nights, but he picked up on the second ring. Hey, Marco, quick question. You remember yesterday morning, you see anything weird? You mean Beverly playing Tomb Raider over your fence? Yeah. I was pulling out of the driveway when she went airborne. You think you'd be willing to write a witness statement? Absolutely. That woman's been harassing everybody for months. I'll drop it off tomorrow. After we hung up, I reached out to someone else, Heather Lynn. We served together years ago. She's a civil attorney now, specializes in property disputes. I hadn't talked to her in a while, but when I explained the situation, she agreed to meet for coffee the next morning. We met at a quiet diner just outside city limits. Heather was already there, flipping through the folder I'd dropped off at her office the night before. This is more serious than I thought, she said without looking up. That disciplinary letter isn't just an intimidation tactic. They're trying to build a case to force a lien. My stomach tightened. A lien for what? For non-compliance. It's common in overreaching HOAs. They issue stacked fines, claim you're in default, and then try to attach a lien to your property. But I haven't paid any fines. I haven't even agreed that they're valid. Doesn't matter. If they vote internally and document it, some courts will assume due process, especially if homeowners don't show up to challenge it. I sat back, stunned. So they could try to take my house over a fence and 2 dogs, they can try. But you've got 2 advantages, documented footage and state law on your side. And if it turns out they're manufacturing violations or misusing HOA funds to pursue this, we can hit them back. Heather handed me a packet of forms. Start with this. It's a formal request for financial transparency. Under state law, they have to provide a breakdown of how HOA dues are being spent. If you're being targeted, we'll see it in the paper trail. I thanked her and left with a plan forming. Back home, I drafted the request and sent it certified with return receipt. Then I posted a copy on the neighborhood forum, tagging it as Transparency Request HOA Budget. Within an hour, 5 replies popped up, all from neighbors who'd had their own run-ins with Beverly and the board. One person mentioned unexplained beautification fees. Another said they were forced to repaint their front door 3 times in 1 year after Beverly claimed the shade was too bold. Then came the message that lit the fuse. It was from a retired accountant named Sandra, who lived at the end of the street. She'd been quietly tracking the HOA's spending for 2 years, and she had records. Real records. Copies of checks, budget discrepancies, even a questionable landscaping contract awarded to Beverly's cousin. I invited her over. She arrived with a tote bag full of binders and a look of someone who'd been waiting for this moment a long time. "I've got everything," she said as she set the bag down on my dining table. "Invoices, meeting minutes, even audio from last April's budget session." They didn't know I was recording. "What made you start logging all this?" She gave a dry laugh. "The day they fined me for having a hummingbird feeder, said it attracted pests. We spent the next 3 hours building a timeline." Turns out, the HOA had been quietly shifting funds from general maintenance into a compliance enforcement line item 1 that didn't exist in the original budget. Over $20,000 had been funneled into it over the past 18 months, with no oversight. And the kicker: the contractor who supposedly repaired the community fountain last summer had the same address as Beverly's boutique floral business. That night, I sent all of it Sandra's records, Marco's statement, Heather's forms, and the security footage to Ramirez. Less than 24 hours later, he called. "We're escalating this. I just got off the phone with the county investigator. If even half of that budget stuff checks out, the HOA board could be looking at charges for fraud and misappropriation." I stood by the window, watching Echo chase a squirrel across the yard. "What do you need from me next? Show up to that disciplinary hearing, let them think you're walking into a trap, then blow their whole scam wide open." I didn't say anything right away, just watched the clouds roll in over the treetops. "All right," I said finally. "Let's turn the tables." The meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. sharp in the community clubhouse, a beige box of a building with fake columns and flickering fluorescent lights that buzzed like dying insects. I parked across the street and walked in deliberately, holding a single folder tucked under my arm. Inside were printouts, statements, and the one thing Beverly hadn't counted on a subpoena: the room was already half full. Neighbors sat in folding chairs arranged in crooked rows. A low murmur buzzed through the crowd. At the front table, Beverly was flanked by the full HOA board. 5 of them, including the president, Ron Halley, who blinked too much and always looked like he was trying to sell you a used boat. They all wore matching navy blazers with little gold name tags. Beverly's had a new ribbon pinned to it, like she'd awarded herself a medal for surviving a fence climb. "Mr. Zeller," Ron said, gesturing to a chair facing the board. "You've been asked here to discuss multiple community violations, some quite serious." I took my seat without looking at the papers in front of them. "You mean the fabricated ones?" Beverly leaned forward. "We have photographic documentation, witness testimony, and board approval to issue fines. If you fail to comply, the HOA reserves the right to initiate a lien proceeding." I opened my folder and slid a document across the table. "That's interesting, because you're about to be served." Ron hesitated before picking it up. His eyes darted across the page in quick, nervous jerks. This is a subpoena." "Correct," I said. "The County Fraud Division has opened an investigation into your financial practices. You're being asked to produce itemized records for all HOA expenditures going back 3 fiscal years." A ripple moved through the room behind me as neighbors leaned in. Beverly bared her teeth in something that might have been a smile in another species. "This is absurd." "You can't just—" I cut her off. "You spent HOA funds on a landscaping contract awarded to your cousin who doesn't have a business license. That's procurement fraud. You redirected dues into an unauthorized compliance fund. That's misappropriation. And you used that fund to hire a private investigator to photograph residents without their knowledge. That's illegal surveillance." Gasps broke out behind me. A man in the second row stood up. "Wait, she had people followed," I nodded. "Hired through a shell company." The invoices were in the records a neighbor provided. And there's something else. I pulled out a second sheet and placed it in front of Ron. "This is a letter from the Department of Consumer Affairs. They're investigating your HOA for failing to disclose financial audits. That's a civil violation with serious penalties." Ron's hands trembled as he placed the paper down. "This is a misunderstanding." "No," I said. "This is years of corruption finally catching up." Beverly tried to regain control. "This meeting is about Mr. Zeller's violations, not baseless allegations." "Let me guess," I said. You're referring to the fence that complies with city code or the trained police dogs certified and registered with the state, she scoffed. Those animals are a public risk. I leaned forward. Then why did you enter the property without notifying anyone? You climbed over a locked fence into a yard with 2 K9s during an active training cooldown. That's not just reckless. Beverly, it's criminal trespassing and endangerment. She opened her mouth, but I wasn't done. I've submitted the footage to law enforcement. The city prosecutor has reviewed it, along with the audio recordings from your previous board meetings. You know, the ones where you discussed targeting specific homeowners for non-compliance sweeps. Someone near the back stood up. A woman with a clipboard of her own. That's exactly what they did to my mother. Fined her for a planter box, then threatened to tow her car. I have the minutes where that fine was approved, I said. It was bundled with 6 others in a single vote. No individual review, no appeal process. Ron looked like he wanted to melt into his chair. That was standard procedure. No, Ron, I said. That was abuse of power. The door opened in the back of the room. 2 uniformed deputies stepped inside. The crowd parted as they made their way toward the front. Excuse the interruption, one deputy said. We're here to serve formal notice. Beverly Kingsley and Ron Halley, you're required to appear before the county oversight panel for a preliminary hearing on charges of fraudulent disbursement and unauthorized surveillance. Beverly stood up so fast her chair tipped over. You have no right. This is a private board meeting. One of the deputies held up a warrant. Signed by Judge Elkins this morning. You'll be allowed to respond through counsel, but if you interfere with the investigation, further charges may follow. Ron's face turned gray. Beverly's mouth opened and closed like she was trying to speak underwater. I stood up and turned to the room. I'm not here because I enjoy confrontation. I'm here because someone crossed a line, and I'm not the only one. They've used fear and paperwork to bully this neighborhood for years. But not anymore, a voice called out from the middle row. What can we do? Start by electing a new board, I said. The bylaws allow for a recall with a 2/3 vote. I brought copies of the petition. If you want change, sign it. The next hour was a blur. People lined up to add their names. One woman handed over a stack of letters she'd received from the board, everyone nitpicking something different. A man in his 70s dropped off photos of his mailbox being inspected without permission. By the time I got home, the clubhouse lights were still on. Sandra was waiting on my porch with a thermos of coffee and a look of grim satisfaction. I told you they were dirty, she said, handing me a cup. You weren't wrong. Ramirez called, said the prosecutor wants to meet. They're considering a full audit of the HOA's finances. If they find what we think they will. I sipped the coffee. Could flip the entire structure, Sandra nodded. They'll try to stall, maybe even countersue. They'll lose, she smiled without showing her teeth. Let them try. The next morning, I filed the petition for board recall. We already had over 60% of the signatures needed. I spent the weekend helping neighbors organize. People who'd barely spoken to each other before were suddenly exchanging phone numbers and planning their own committee. The following week, the oversight panel held its first public hearing. Beverly and Ron appeared with a lawyer who looked like he regretted his life choices. The evidence was overwhelming: contracts with no competitive bids, fines issued without due process, and surveillance logs with timestamps that violated multiple privacy laws. The panel suspended both from board duties immediately. A temporary administrator was appointed to oversee operations and freeze all HOA spending until the investigation concluded. 2 days later, I received an anonymous envelope in my mailbox. Inside was a typed letter with no signature. I didn't know how far they'd gone. I thought it was just petty stuff. Thank you for exposing them. We were afraid to speak up. No return address, just a message. That night, I let Thor and Echo run the yard without their leashes. For the first time in months, the air felt clear. The fence stood exactly where it had always been, and the dogs patrolled it with calm certainty. Not because they were guarding against intruders, but because they knew, just like I did, that the real threat had finally been dealt with. The temporary administrator appointed by the county, a no-nonsense woman named Reina Ochoa, held her first public meeting 3 days after the suspension. She wasn't a local, which worked in her favor. She didn't owe anyone favors, didn't care about club gossip, and didn't blink when she walked into a room full of suspicious homeowners and rattled bored loyalists. She opened by reading a brief statement from the county clerk's office. Then she did something none of us expected. She pulled out a stack of folders and handed them to the residents seated in the front row. "These are the full ledgers from the last 3 years," she said, "redacted only for personal addresses. You have every right to see how your dues were spent." I was sitting off to the side with Heather, Lynn, and Sandra. Heather leaned over and whispered, "That's a power move. She's not just cleaning house, she's exercising the whole building." Within minutes, murmurs spread as neighbors flipped through the records. Someone pointed out a $6,800 payment to a pool maintenance company during a winter month when the pool had been closed for repairs. Another circled a recurring $400 monthly consulting fee paid to a firm with no website and a disconnected number. Raina waited just long enough for the room to start boiling before continuing. "There's a secondary issue," she said. The forensic audit revealed a forged signature on a lien issued last year. It was used to initiate foreclosure proceedings against a homeowner who was, in fact, fully paid up. A hand shot up from the middle row. It was a quiet man named Walter who lived near the entrance of the neighborhood. He usually kept to himself and wore the same forest green windbreaker no matter the temperature. Raina nodded to him. "That was me," Walter said. "They told me I'd missed 3 months of dues, but I'd paid them all through auto draft. I showed the bank statements, but they said it was too late." Raina set down her pen. The signature on the lien was Beverly Kingsley's. The treasurer at the time, Ron Halley, notarized it. Both documents are now part of the criminal investigation. Walter's hands were trembling slightly, but his voice was steady. "I had to sell my truck to hire a lawyer. I almost lost my house. Heather stood before I could. We'll be filing a class action," she said. "Anyone who faced fabricated fines, false liens, or intimidation tactics, your testimony matters, and you may be entitled to restitution." Raina nodded her approval. "And for those who don't want to wait that long, the prosecutor's office is opening a community complaint channel. All sworn statements submitted within the next 2 weeks will be reviewed for inclusion in the case." The rest of the meeting was a blur of furious homeowners, legal questions, and whispered plans for neighborhood watch groups. But the real headline came the next morning. I was on the porch repairing a cracked railing panel when Ramirez pulled up in an unmarked cruiser. He stepped out, holding a folded sheet in one hand and a frown that didn't belong on his face. "They're pressing real charges now," he said without preamble. "Forgery, fraud, conspiracy to commit property theft. That's not even the worst of it." I set the drill down. "What could possibly be worse?" He handed me the paper. "There's a separate investigation now, state level. They discovered a set of fake compliance notices mailed to residents under a dummy HOA letterhead. Difference is, they weren't filed through the HOA's regular channels. They were mailed from a P.O. box in another county." I read the report. It detailed over 20 letters sent to vulnerable homeowners, elderly, non-native speakers, and one single mother threatening fines or foreclosure if they didn't send checks to a private address. Not the HOA's office. A personal mailbox registered under an alias. "I know that address," I said. "It's an old printing company off Route 20. They went out of business last year." "Beverly leased the box," Ramirez said. "Under her maiden name, her cousin cashed the checks." "How much?" "Almost $38,000 in total. That's felony territory." "She's going away for a long time." I didn't say anything, just stared at the paper and felt my jaw tighten. Ramirez put a hand on my shoulder. "You started this, you pulled the thread, and now the whole thing's unraveling." 2 days later, Beverly was arrested in her home. She tried to lock herself in her sunroom, but the officers had a warrant and the locksmith had a drill. Ron was picked up an hour later at a golf course outside the city. He tried to play dumb right up until they showed him the wire transfers. The court arraignment was open to the public. Sandra and I attended, along with about 20 other neighbors. Beverly walked in with a lawyer and a face that looked like it had forgotten how to be smug. She didn't look at anyone in the gallery. The judge denied bail, citing her access to community funds and her attempts to interfere with the investigation. Ron didn't even speak. His attorney did all the talking and failed to make a single dent in the charges. By the time we left the courthouse, the sun had started to set. Sandra and I stood on the sidewalk outside, watching the sky turn gold behind the city buildings. "You think they'll actually serve time?" she asked. "They will," I said. "This isn't just a slap on the wrist. They went after people's homes. Their lives." She nodded and pulled out a folded sheet from her bag. "Here, petition signatures. We're past the 2/3 mark. Recall votes official." Less than a week later, the community voted. Every board member except one was removed. The only one spared was a woman named Elise, who'd abstained from almost every vote on record and had submitted her resignation 2 months earlier, citing moral discomfort. Raina helped oversee the transition to a new board. This one was made up of people who'd actually lived in the neighborhood for more than 2 years, including Walter, who was unanimously elected treasurer. I declined the nomination for president. I told them I preferred dogs to people, and most of the room laughed harder than they should have. Instead, I offered to head a new oversight committee. No power, no budget, just eyes on the numbers and a direct line to the county in case someone ever got ideas again. The dogs adjusted quickly to the quiet. Echo no longer had to remain on alert every time someone walked past the property. Thor, ever the sentinel, still patrolled the perimeter but with less urgency. They, like me, recognized peace when they saw it. One evening, a new neighbor stopped by with a tray of cookies and a stack of questions about the bylaws. I gave her the updated packet and told her she was in good company. Later, as I sat on the back steps watching the tree line sway in the breeze, I heard the gate creak open. For a second, I tensed instinct, but it was Marco, carrying 2 lawn chairs and a 6-pack. "Thought we could celebrate," he said. "No more surveillance. No more fines for breathing too loud." I laughed and stood to grab the fire pit lighter. As the flames took hold and the first stars appeared overhead, I allowed myself to relax, truly relax, for the first time in months. There were no hidden cameras, no forged threats, no HOA vice president climbing fences like a squirrel with a clipboard, just a neighborhood taking itself back, one signature, one testimony, one truth at a time.